What's happening, my darling Judy Floreal? Welcome to Hangry and Horny.
Thank you.
A long time overdue.
Mm-hmm.
So we're in Northern Ireland at our home in Bangor, and we've been talking about podcasting and sharing your story to the world for what seems like ages. We've been through a pandemic, and so much has happened. But we're finally here, and why don't you just share to the world who you are, how we met, whatever you want.
Hi.
Hi.
Well, thank you for asking me out.
Oh, I don't know about that. Yeah, we have a running debate on who asked who out for a first date. So we met through Scott Riley, Causeway Living, Wim Hof instructor. He had his Dash and Splash event, which was happening every Sunday. And so I'd known Scott for a while and just been pretty much flying over to Ireland to visit him. And, we had met on the beach at one of his events, cold water immersion, breathing. And, I don't know, basically we were chatting, right? I want you to give your version of the story, but my version is you asked me out. I looked at Scott and I said, did she just ask me out on a date? And he was like, mm-hmm. Not verbally, but he just shook his head up and down like, yes, she did ask you out. But, it depends on who he asks, whether it's a girl or a guy. It's like most girls are like, nah, she didn't ask you out. And all the guys are like, yeah, Judy asked you out.
Well, I was being polite. We wanted to chat. We'd had a conversation. And I remember looking back at the dates, and it was the 11th of the 11th, 2018. So we had that conversation, and you were saying, stop thinking what's the worst that can happen. You got to think what's the best that can happen. And it was like a light bulb moment in my head, because I was like, of course, if I'm saying what's the best that can happen, my subconscious will focus on that, and it will dwell on that, and it will think of all the good possibilities. Because my brain was so conditioned for so long to always think, what's the worst? And I lived my life that way. And a lot of times I had to overcome so much fear to do something new, to kind of break out of that kind of fear mindset. So I was doing my best to do that and really facing a lot of fears. And then was saying it to you in that first conversation. You were like, no, think what's the best that can happen. So the light bulb went on. And then a few weeks in, I was like, geez, this phrase has just been going around my head constantly. I was telling everybody about it, friends, family, clients at work, anybody that would listen about, thinking about what's the best that can happen. And I heard that you guys were going back to America, and I thought, I've got to let you know. And I thought, right, I'll send you a message. You'll never see it. It goes in one of those weird folders in Facebook, if you're not friends. And you replied straight away, and we had a bit of a conversation, and it was just, just a nice little conversation. There wasn't anything there. There wasn't any other motive, but just to say thank you. And we didn't really get to chat the next couple of Dash and Splashes. And you stayed on rather than leaving, because you were supposed to leave. But you stayed on for a few more weeks. And then the week that we did get a little bit of a chat, it was the first time I noticed your hearing aid. And I was like, oh, geez, the acoustics in this building are awful. I can barely make out conversations. I don't know how you're, managing it. So then I was like, oh, I'm sorry we didn't get to chat. Maybe we could chat somewhere where we could hear each other better. And then that's what I said. That was me being friendly and polite.
Yeah, but you forget the part afterwards where we were leaving the building. We were leaving with our friend Ivan and Scott, and we were parting ways. You were going in the direction with Ivan. I was going in the direction with Scott, so I was staying with Scott. And then basically that's when you said, let's meet up at some point, for like a cuppa, right? And
which is so funny, because my brain doesn't remember that bit.
Yeah,
I remember chatting, but I don't remember saying that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then we parted ways, said goodbye, and then I looked at Scott and then I said, did she just ask me out on a date? And he's like, yep, So I was like, thought so. And maybe I was just a little cocky there, but I just, I just felt like, wow, she just asked me out and she was showing interest. Because I do remember that part when we were in the cafe and it was loud. And so much was happening that we didn't really get a chance to like chat, because you had mentioned about like having a chat then. And, but yeah, I mean, I think it's just pretty funny, human nature anyways, how people only remember based on their own lens on how they view the world, right? And honestly, for me, my memory isn't the best. So I'll give you that, just because I've been living, I guess, in a condensed version of life because of traveling and meeting so many people and having so many conversations. You kind of compress everything, and so my version of reality may not be the same, as like yours per se, obviously, but I just. That's how I perceived it, and it's always our like running joke. But the long story short, we ended up getting married during the pandemic, which was,
beautiful.
So beautiful. Like everything came together, even though there was a lockdown. Initially, we were in Hawaii in February, just as the word of this nature of a virus that was coming from China. We were on vacation in Hawaii. That's when I like proposed to you the first time, and you said absolutely, and I was like sitting there going, absolutely what? And you said absolutely yes. And you're in tears because you thought I was like joking, And the deal is I just didn't have the engagement ring at the time, so I gave you a miniature pineapple pie. And but yeah, so we came back to the mainland in California. You flew back to Ireland, and then that's when the full global lockdown happened in March. And so we were together for how long?
4 months.
It was that long.
March, April, May. Oh no, 3 months.
3 yeah.
3 months.
So the moment
like
that
4.
there was the moment that there was a lift, a partial lift, my mom just looked at me. We were in San Francisco, Daly City specifically, and she just said, just go be with your fiance, your honey, and I'm like, sure, because I pretty much was making sure my mom was okay. So there was so much happening with looting and assaults, and I think during that time was I'm not sure if that was like the Black Lives Matter stuff was happening with George Floyd, but there was a lot of mayhem going on. And so anyways, I just got the blessing of my mother, and I hopped on the plane and miraculously came over to Ireland, and we got married, and I think it was September, I better remember that, 24th. And the process to getting our marriage license and the visa and everything was just so miraculous.
Totally.
Yeah. So what was your perspective during that time, when we were in Hawaii and then, come back here and all of that unfolds?
Well,
the pandemic.
The Hawaii was incredible. Never been somewhere so beautiful, and really did feel so magical. And you'd said to me a few times about, Hawaii makes or breaks a couple, and something about the energy that's there and just how beautiful it is. And I remember initially actually struggling a little bit and feeling so paranoid, and very self-conscious and not relaxing. And then I don't quite know, I think you helped me, and I just snapped out of it and then just relaxed and totally enjoyed it, and just was just in awe of just how amazingly beautiful a place it was. And we just had such an amazing time. It really was beautiful, really beautiful. And then to go from the contrast, back home, back working, just getting on with life, chatting every day on the phone, and then all the lockdown stuff happening. That was crazy. It was hard because everything suddenly changed. You didn't know when it was going to end. Was scary. You weren't too sure who to believe, what reports were coming through, how bad it was going to be, the whole thing. It really was quite, just hard. I found it hard. I felt very isolated, in the apartment by myself. Most of the other neighbours are elderly. Well, they are. They're all older than me or elderly. So there was a fear there because I was the young one, 40, and I'm the young one in the building kind of thing. You could see them flinch if they, saw each other in a corridor or went out to the bins or something like that. And you just think, this is madness, absolute madness. And then having my birthday in April by myself, 40th birthday by myself. Thankfully at that point, a friend was needing support. He was had rented out the walled garden at Helen's Bay, was making all the organic vegetables there, and really needed assistance, lost most of the staff. So I was like, well, I'm happy to volunteer, to make sure that all those crops didn't go to waste and all the seedlings and everything that he had planted. So that was a real miracle to have that sanctuary there. Really enjoyed it. It literally was a lifeline, and get out in nature every day and get your hands in the soil and have this lovely little bubble, a huge garden, an acre space, usually there's only 2, maybe 3 of us bumbling around doing that. It was incredible, and that really helped to, I think, grind me through it. Otherwise, I think if I'd been in the apartment the whole time by myself, not really doing very much out, I would have struggled, definitely. It was a crazy time.
And the weather was great, right?
Weather was amazing, amazing. I think there was a stretch of 90 days where we didn't have rain, which is a miracle in Northern Ireland. And trying to water that garden and make sure all the vegetables still grew sometimes would take me 3 hours just to water that whole space. It was huge. But the weather was amazing. But it's amazing as well. It's it's so much about how you see things, how you frame things, what you focus on. And at so many different times there was just the blessing that I needed, or people got in touch. Lovely little stray cat we've called Smoky Blue ran up to me one day in the car park. Has been our little pal ever since. Just lives across we see it from our bedroom window where he lives now. You just think, there's all these lovely little gifts that the universe sends whenever you need, comfort or connection or a bit of love, just a reminder that, things are good. And I think for me, what I saw during the pandemic is that it really brought out people's worst, but also brought out people's best. It's very much about what you focus on. So sometimes, yes, I did struggle, but it was also that, right, okay, pick yourself up. You can't focus on that. This is positive. We'll get through this. And don't give in to that fear and focusing on that fear. Because it was there and it was very real, and you could feel it off so many people. If you went to the supermarket, even walking along the coastal path here, people were scared. People would physically flinch, when I was walking past, and sometimes that gets to you, if you're kind of just in your head the whole time. And then sometimes you're like, okay, just have that compassion and go, well, they're obviously in a really struggling space. They feel maybe isolated, very scared, maybe really lonely. And I made sure, I would normally do it anyway, but I kind of made extra sure that when I did come out, walk past people, that I would say hello or I would smile. And so many times, older people just really wanted to chat and just thought, they're probably locked in their own home by themselves. This is their one stint to get out, because we were restricted down to 1 hour, outside exercise a day kind of thing. And then so many times had these lovely conversations with complete strangers that I've never met since. And I think it's, when you have that time, to be able to love others along the way, you don't know what they're going through. And so many times that we're blessed, and it's lovely to be able to have the chance and the opportunity to bless other people. So.
Yeah, it was a very intense time, for sure. And it was interesting to sort of look back where we are now, and there's some sense of normalcy right now. Hopefully that continues. The mental health aspect has been very devastating for many people on multiple levels, whether they lost a loved one to the pandemic, a lot of controversy, a lot of censorship. But I think the biggest thing was just the hardship it was for people to be isolated. A lot of the misinformation was also difficult. But, when we look back to before the pandemic as it was unfolding, I remember being on the airplane on the way to Hawaii, and a fellow was sitting next to me, and he was going to be transferring to another flight to head out to Guam. So it was really cool to chat with him because I had spent 18 months in Guam, and it was really cool to just through conversation to have these memories come up. But he was wearing a mask, and so it wasn't even like full blown yet, and he was already afraid, and understandably so, because Guam is very close to Asia, and there's a lot of flights going in and out to China. So, but we were in our little paradise in Hawaii, and that was beautiful. So back to like what you were saying about framing things in life and your focus. What was going on with you when we had that conversation and you were saying, I think you were saying that you were facing your fears, right? And that you were saying, well, what's the worst that can happen? And that's when I heard that. And so the reason I said that to you was because I had heard a sort of Good Morning America program, and they're interviewing a young lady, and I think she wrote a book about facing her fears. I thought the book title was What's the Best That Can Happen. Not sure what it was, but she did say that for every day, for I think something like 3 months or a whole year, I forget what, but she did a fear a day. And she said that she had to reframe because she remembers saying that to herself, what's the worst that can happen? And of course, immediately your brain, your mind will go, oh, death, or shame. And that she caught herself in that moment, and she's like, why would I say that to myself? And that's just kind of what everybody says, right? And we don't even realize the words that we use because it's just lingo in society and culture. So that when my light bulb went off, because I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. Like, she would always say to herself, what's the best that can happen? So when you said, what's the worst that can happen? I was like, And I remember your eyes lit up, and you're like, wow, that's so brilliant. So what happened after that conversation we had after Dash and Splash in that cafe?
Well, for me, it was that light bulb moment. It really was a big mental shift. And I remember coming back from Dash and Splash, and I wrote it on my chalkboard in the kitchen, and it's still there. How long is that? 3.5 years ago? It's still there. And it was just one of those shifting moments because I focused on it for such a long time. It was just there, and I was saying it and saying it and saying it again. And then funnily enough, because like when you did actually like send me the message and say about going on a date, I like straight away panicked, like proper panicked. I hadn't gone out with very many people. I'd had an abusive, violent marriage. It was like the main relationship that I'd had in my life at that point, and it was just so hard, and I was petrified at the thought of going out with somebody. I wanted to be with somebody, wanted to, have, to get married again, to have a family, all of that. But the thought of somebody having expectations, the thought about going on dates just literally petrified me. And I remember like crying my eyes out just scared. And you'd said about doing something, I think it was Thursday. I worked like a full long shift on a Thursday, so I couldn't have done anything. Not finishing work until like 10:30 at night. So I just was like, no, I'm sorry, busy, blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? And then carried on crying. And then was like, Judith, you've been saying for weeks on end here and to everybody that you know, what's the best that can happen? And I was like, you need to say when you're free. Stop being so scared. Say when you're free. And if you hadn't have said that phrase, I wouldn't have written back. You know, in the thought of it was just too scary. So I did write back, and then you're like, oh, all right, okay. You know what I mean? And it was, that's how it happened. And just think, I wouldn't have given that an opportunity. I would have avoided it. And then you would have spent your time here, went off to America, and who knows what would have happened. And it was interesting as well, because at that point, I was facing a lot of fears. Every time I came across something that I was scared of, I would do it. You know, like it could be a big thing, it could be a small thing. I remember at a play park with one of the kids, and you had this huge slide where there's like a big drop down, where you basically don't hit anything till about 2 meters down. It's like a full free fall drop. And I was like, gotta do it. I hesitated just before I jumped off, and of course I hurt myself, bruised myself on one side because I landed on one side going down, but it was like, I did it. Do you know what I mean? And it was like, it was doing those things, whatever it was that did scare me, and my mindset was, well, what's the worst that can happen? I'm just scared, I'm gonna do it anyway. But to really shift it and think, what's the best that can happen, was just totally reframed it, and I think, for so many times, it is that reframing that changes everything. Just changes everything. How you feel every day, how you function every day, how you function with people every day, and how that, because I don't know if like empath's the right word, but I would really pick up on people's energies and really pick up on, how they're feeling. Particularly if somebody's like annoyed or irritated, my brain would always be like, oh, what have I done? It's my fault. Why are they grumpy? If I said something, and it would be constantly on that kind of negative loop. And since trying to change it and think, well, what's the best that can happen? Half the time it's like, actually, there's nothing to do with me. They're just having a bad day. And actually, in some ways, it's a bit of an honour that they can really show their true colours and be themselves. If they're grumpy or if they're feeling down, if they're angry, whatever it is, I'm allowing them to have that space. But before, I would have kind of like, oh, and got all like, try to fix everything, rather than just letting them be, and giving that space and not taking on a whole lot of stuff that's nothing to do with me. And sometimes I absolutely nail that, and sometimes I don't, but it's happening, I'm getting better on that journey, and getting better figuring out myself, and not holding myself back as much. It's definitely still a process, it's definitely still a journey. You've been great for that. There's so many times where you've just said something and it just helps you to flick out of the little negative lip in my head. And I love getting outside, but sometimes I do need to kick up the bum, and you're like, come on, Judith, outside. Do you know what I mean? And it's been so good recently where we've been getting up first thing, before having breakfast or whatever, just get outside. Before we used to always like stick our head out the window, get the sunlight in our eyes, but now like going out for that walk just changes the whole start to the day, which means it just changes the rest of the day. And then I love at night time going for a walk, looking at the stars. Like, how often have we done that now? We just go down to the local park, and it's usually clear skies. Even if it's not a clear sky, it just really helps for me to settle me. I find that I sleep so much better, and when I've got that kind of restfulness before I sleep, when I do sleep, I sleep so good. But then I also dream. Remembering dreams is amazing. I never did that until recently. Very few times I would have remembered anything that had happened, what I dreamt about. Yeah, it's exciting.
Well, what's going on? Like I said, you were already on a healing journey and path. You had talked about having a abusive marriage that you got out of, ended up, coming back home to Northern Ireland where you were born, which you were very reluctant, but somehow, as far as I remember, you said that the universe was drawing you back home, And there is something special here. Hawaii has always been my home. Although I grew up in California, it was a place, it's still like this feeling that is magical, as you said, and I wanted to share that with you. Northern Ireland is the same. Been trying to keep that a secret. And just because, you know, the people here are very kind. The conflicts that happened over centuries in Ireland through different invaders, and then obviously culminating to the conflicts that had happened in Ireland, you know, with the sort of complicated, you know, UK government and Irish people, and then there's also the religious component with the Protestants and the Catholics. It's very convoluted, and you know, I'm only now, after living here for a while, starting to understand the history and the culture, the way people speak. But tell us what was going on, because at the time that we met, you were working at a flotation center, which is also known as a sensory deprivation tank, where you lie in salt water, about body temperature, skin temperature actually, and in complete darkness. Obviously there's options to do it with light, but the whole point is to cut off any input from the outside world, and to be lying in a buoyant state, and be with yourself in isolation with your thoughts, your mind. And so for me, you know, having that experience, it's like meditation on steroids. And so you were a manager at Hydro-Ease, and so you're already again on that healing path. So sort of tell us, how did you end up there, and like why? What was going on with your mental health?
I suppose you have to go, for me it would be right back to the start. You know, I grew up during the Troubles, was born 1980. My dad was working for the police force, which was called the RUC, and I mean, it was a difficult time. It was a scary time. Mum and Dad tried their best to, you know, shield us from it. And there are things that I didn't understand until I was an adult, and going, oh right, that's what was happening. You didn't realise sometimes just the danger that we were in as a family. We were actually threatened as a family and had to move. That's how we ended up going from the west coast to the east coast. But yeah, there's so much of a history with my mum and dad. Both sides of the family had very violent, abusive, traumatic backgrounds that had gone on for generations. I haven't gone too far back in the family history, but we think it's gone back for at least 4 generations on both sides. So, I mean, it was, I suppose for them it was hard because, you know, they hadn't healed themselves. They hadn't had the knowledge to really go through and have the tools to heal themselves. So when they came together, even though it was, you know, in love and, you know, wanting the best things, actually in the end it brought out the worst. And it was a scary home. It was a scary home to be in. And that was day and daily. And that's hard, living in fear basically every day. That's hard. And it takes a toll, and, you know, sometimes it's not until you can unravel different parts, and it's like that onion, whether you get rid of some of like the bigger layers, but there's still, you know, layers and layers and layers inside. And sometimes I would have got despondent with that on the healing journey, but I think it's like, well, we're always there. All of us are going through whatever, how dramatic your past has been. We're all grappling with the same issues, you know, fear, abandonment, isolation, rejection,
Trauma.
Anger, trauma, guilt, resentment, bitterness, revenge. It's all the same stuff. it's all the same emotions. And we can all get stuck. And I think for me, it seemed to be emotionally, I got stuck at different times where something big had happened early on. And it always seems to pull back right into that early childhood. Sometimes it's like when I was 3, when I was 4, when I was 5. And it seems to kind of like pull me back into different moments. And when you're able to sit with it and go, well, what happened? Why do I feel like that? What was that about? And just sit with it. And I learned a technique through different people. I think Viv at Hangry, and also really good author Edith Edgar, who wrote about the gift. No, the first book she wrote was The Choice. She was a Holocaust survivor. And basically she was like, you have a choice. Any situation, even in a concentration camp, you have a choice. Because you choose what you focus on. You choose how you're going to frame that day. You choose what you let your imagination go to. So even if you're locked and you're tired and you can't do anything, you can still choose your thoughts. You can still choose what you focus on. And she talked about different techniques where basically you go back into those situations, and it could be like younger Judy, let's say 3 years ago, but it could be me when I was really small. And I basically just go as the adult and go, I'm here for you now. Little Judith, I'm here. I'm your adult self. And basically like take little Judy into my arms, and be the adult and be what I didn't get, what I needed at that time. And it's been so healing because I can do it myself. I don't need any, big therapist or a big appointment or whatever. It's just me helping myself. It's like everything I need is here. And I think sometimes for so long I believed I was broken. I truly believed I was broken. I also believed that if I could heal and I could heal everything up, that I would have scars and everybody would still see the scars and I would never be whole. I'd look at other people and just think, oh, you've had such a nice childhood, you've had such a nice start in life, you've got loving parents, you've got a loving family, you've really not got anything to worry about. And that was kind of like that more immature mind, and going, actually, no, everybody, we've all struggled with different issues, doesn't matter how big or small they are. But it's knowing that you're your own saviour. Do you mean? I kind of felt for so many times, and I was part of lots of different religious organisations for years, thinking that, that's the way, that's where I'm going to get healing, that's where it's going to be. And you almost think that you're going to get to a point where it's like, one day I'll be healed. And you'll have the big banner, and there'll be a little party, and you're like, I'm done now, thanks guys, I'm there. And then I can go and my heart was always to help other people, and actually realising that it doesn't work that way. There's never a day that comes out you're perfect. If you do realise that you've got to that perfect stage, you're not here on the earth anymore, because you've done what you needed to do. And I think we were chatting with a friend who's also a really good, incredible person that's helped us on our journey, our healing journey. We call him Double A Matt, and how he was saying, because I'd focused for so long on being a perfectionist, and I think it was a control thing because I wasn't in control of what went on when I was so young, that I just tried to control everything else about myself, and I was such a perfectionist. And it's been the rod that I beat myself up with many, many times. And he was like saying, it's good enough for now. To know that it's good enough for now. And to really believe that and really accept that. And it's been going in my head the last few days about it's good enough and it's good enough for now. And there's quite a shift. And funnily enough, I've made my first ever thing with a sewing machine, the tiniest cushion in the world. But, there's lots of issues with it. It's by far perfect. But for me, I'm delighted. I literally just finished it just before the podcast, hand sewed the last little bit on it. But it's like, and I was able to do it with my mum's old sewing machine, which was amazing. It has been used for about 35 years. And it's like, I'm getting so much joy from this little tiny cushion because I made it completely. The whole thing, I've never done that. And using the sewing machine was actually a big fear of doing so, because it was just like, well, I'll mess it up. So I wasn't trying anything for so long. And it's like, I made a cushion. So he can sit up there with our little genome. Oh, sorry.
A little genome. Flow genome. So you say good enough for now, and in the context where it's like, although you had this little positive meme, it's like, what's the best that can happen? You still were holding back on your creativity. And things like that in life happens. I mean, I don't think I podcast probably in I don't know, it's been like a year or 2 years. I've lost track of time, but, you know, a new little positive meme tool comes out from our friend AA Matt, and he says in regards to like creativity or life, it never ends. There's no like end point for creativity and expression. So when you're creating something or expressing something, you're coming from a point of view that whatever you're creating is good enough for now, instead of being a perfectionist or a procrastinator where you're like, oh, you know, I'll put this off, or like I really want to but I'm afraid, or whatever inner judgment you have, or even judgment of what other people may judge your work. But that quote that he said was so powerful, to the point where like here you are using your mother's sewing machine and creating a beautiful little cushion pillow. That's another inside joke. But yeah, it was just so neat to see you blossom, because even though you had that like what's the best that can happen, there's still blocks in there. In regards to you being an artist, you're amazing. You know, I've seen your work from like when you're in high school, just incredible, like pencil art, you know, charcoal, and then I think you had some paintings in there too, and ballpoint pen. So, you know, just trying to like encourage you to do that, right? And there was a block for you, and with the work that we've been doing with our friend who does Transtherapy, there, at least for me, in the evolution of what I've gone through in life, there's always been something that's helped me get past a little bit of a limitation. And so I'm a little bit wary when, just because I've lived long enough to see when someone says they have the magic pill or like the one technique, or the, you know, I work with a healing device that helps people, you know, with pain and stiffness using microcurrent electricity. And even I know that doesn't work for everybody. It's a very successful modality, as many are, but sometimes like some modalities will take you across the river on a boat, and then you can move forward and you come to another like obstacle. And so we found recently that this friend of ours has helped us tremendously to gain insight, because I've done the meditation, you know, I've done the float tanks, I've done psychedelics, I've used my machine, I've done nutrition, I've moved my body and produced endorphins. And it's really neat because you start to accumulate different tools in your toolbox that you can use. And the most important thing that I found is the ability to listen, and for people to not only like listen to themselves, but which is very powerful. That's where it should start. And then once you understand yourself well enough, you're able to listen to other people on a deeper level, and hopefully through your own experience help them get past like challenges. So like my point is that you never know who you're going to come across in your journey that will help you with your healing. And Good Enough for Now is part of that, like, and that's what's been helping us recently. Just a little simple thing that a friend tells you that can have a massive impact on sort of maybe reaching another level of being. So you're talking about, Judy, you know, your background growing up. What was it that was about religion and sort of these different organizations where you kept falling into over and over, and then at what point did you realize that these organizations or people were taking advantage of you?
Yeah, I think, you know, in Northern Ireland, when I grew up, everybody went somewhere on a Sunday, you know, a place of worship on a Sunday. It was either the chapel, if you were Catholic, or church if you were Protestant. And then if you were Protestant, it went into a whole host of different I was going to use the wrong word there, but, you know, either Presbyterian or Methodist or Brethren or Elim Pentecostal, or so many different types of churches here. And, you know, when I lived in England, people would give you directions via the pubs, but in Ireland they give you directions via the churches, because there's just so many of them. It's the easiest point of reference. So I grew up Protestant, which is hard enough in its own way, because you really get cut off from the history of Ireland and what really went on here. You feel quite disconnected from that. And then, going to church all the time. We went morning service, evening service. We went to Sunday school before the morning service. Sometimes we went to 2 other services in the afternoon as well. So more Sunday schools. So sometimes there were 3 Sunday school services and 2 church services all on a Sunday. That's just too much for anybody. And there was so much about the church that I loved. You know, there were a lot of loving people there, a lot of caring people there. And I also saw, you know, so many times where I saw my mum reach out to other people and really love them and really care for them and visit them. I used to love it when she used to visit the old ladies. I've always loved old people. You know, and, you know, some of the stories that they would share, and it was lovely. But also I saw a lot of very dark sides in, you know, the churches in Northern Ireland, but also in England. And, you know, for me, I'm trying to think, I think everybody that abused me was in the church, you know, a leader in the church. And that messes you up, and that messes your head up. And it messes your head up with what you think, or who you think God is, or the universe. And for me, because there was so much punishment there, you know, my head grew up with this punishing God, that no matter what I did, it wasn't good enough, and never really ever being feeling free enough to be, you know, strong enough for myself, think for my own self. I was, you know, constantly following, well, what's the rules, what's the teaching? And I think part of the church for me, even when I, you know, grew up, because we lost, my mum died when I was young, she died when I was 12. 6 months later we were put into the care system. So the care system in Northern Ireland is basically looked after by the government. We lived in a children's home. Me and my 3 sisters lived in a children's home for 4 months, and then another miracle, we got fostered by a lovely couple in Bangor who took us all on. And I didn't find out until about 23 years later that they were the reason why we were kept together, because the plan was to split us up. And they said,
and how many of you?
4. He takes on 3 teenagers and a 10-year-old, and they took us all on, and willingly took us on, and volunteered themselves to take all 4 of us on. So just incredible to have that. And I think, you know, sometimes when things are really dark, or sometimes when you feel like you're not in control of yourself or kind of other people in your life that you care for, to trust that the universe has got a plan, to send positive thoughts that way. And it's incredible how where something looks hopeless, where just a solution can appear. And we were so blessed to be part of that family, and I now live 5 minutes walk from their door. And hopefully sometimes that I'm able to give back to them. They've given back to me so much. They're in their 80s now, and even though we had that opportunity and we lived there, and they showed us stability and security and what was really more normal. And we'd worked from little girls. We were always meant to work. You chores in the house, but we had a big farm. We were always working. There was always that pressure. We couldn't just be kids. We couldn't just play and have fun and relax and have the developing that how you develop when you're a child, when you are playing and making those interactions and friendships. We didn't have that, and I find through you, actually, because you are just so much fun and you want to go out and play, it's helped me it's helped me have enjoyment and really enjoy life and enjoy the moment and do something for nothing. When you're playing, there's like zero production happening. There's zero, there's not an outcome. For so many times when I was doing something, I had to I have to do this and then that'll be a finished article or a finished piece. There wasn't really the enjoyment. And coming back to that phrase about it's good enough for now, is that I can rest now. I'm happy. I can be present. And that's such a huge thing for me, because before, when you live in so much fear and it's so systemic right across the board for so long, there was always the sadness about what's just happened, guilt, shame, so many things that you take on, and then fear of the future, what's going to happen, that I was never living in now. I was never living in the present. I was never really enjoying the present moment. And when I did have moments, they literally were fleeting moments. I could list not that many over the years where I remembered relaxing. I remembered switching off. I remembered not worrying about something. They were so few and far between. And now they're gathering momentum. There's so many more of them. And, for me, that journey has just been going on for so long. Our foster parents helped to give us that chance where we did have time, where we could be teenagers, where we could, just go to school, just do your homework, not have a whole load of other kind of pressures and stress on. And for me, that's really when my self-healing started. And I remember working so hard because I felt bad, because I hated my dad. I hated people that had abused me in my life, and I didn't want to live with fear, because I could see how much it messes you up. I've seen it with other family members that were older, how it screws you up if you live with fear, and if you live with anger and resentment and just a whole load of suppressed stuff that just rots you from the inside out. So I remember working on it, and I was like 13, 14, and carrying that on, and I felt like, continuing on with church, this is the right thing, it's where God is, this is going to be the right thing to do. And unfortunately, we went to churches that weren't safe places to be. They didn't have, safeguards in place, safeguarding children, looking after vulnerable adults. Those policies weren't in place. There was so many times where we were taken advantage of. And even though we'd been through so much, we were all still quite naive. I was very naive. And thankfully, was protected in different situations where it could have gone really bad. But yeah, I went from that and carried on, through church, and was there. That was my whole social thing. If I wasn't at school, I was at the church. And then as an adult, I just carried on and did the same thing. I went away after my exams, went working in Scotland, went from Scotland to England, and then my sister and I, we both moved down to be part of a Christian ministry that we knew of from a few years ago in Ireland. And for me, I just totally enveloped myself in there. That was my life for 5 years, and I just worked and I served. And I served as much as I could when I could. It was a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of financial input was put in there as well. for it to slowly unravel, and for me basically to wake up one day with the realization that I was being groomed and abused by one of the leaders. And as an adult, that is scary, to go through what I went through as a child, and then for it to basically happen again. It was one of the most terrifying moments. Like, even now, I mean, it's still upsetting because it was so scary. And the shame as an adult, going, how did I get myself into this situation? And then to run to the minister, the leader of the organisation, the only person I confided in about what had happened. And they were like, come stay with me. This is a safe place. We'll figure this out. And over 3 days, convincing me that it was my fault. And I believed it, because I hadn't sorted all the stuff that I'd been through. I was still full of shame. I was still full of guilt. I'd read a few places where when you're abused in whatever way, particularly if it's a physical abuse or a sexual abuse, that you take on the energy of that abuser. You take on that guilt. You take on that shame. That are two massive things to hold. And that fed right back into there. And I was like, it's my fault. I'm the damaged one. They're the adults. I trusted them like with my life. And I just took it all on. And it was devastating because then I was completely isolated. So I'd already isolated myself basically within a cult environment. I was isolated from friends outside of it. I was isolated from family outside of it because I was just weird at that point. There were so many rules that you don't function in society. There was rules about what you wear, what you can and cannot eat, what you cannot listen to. There were rules about everything. And there was so much security in that rule system because it made my life really straightforward. And until the point where I had basically that kind of abuse happen, until that point, I was blissfully happy. Because I felt like I'd made it. I was in this family that loved me and I loved them. And it felt so pure and it felt so right. And it felt like God was just, I saw people get healed. I saw miracles happen. And you see that, particularly as a teenager, when I saw that happen with this organisation when I was, I think, 16. And it was a good friend that got healed. It wasn't just a random stranger. I knew them. I knew them before they got sick. I knew them as they were getting sicker. I knew them as they basically couldn't do anything for themselves. They were so sick with ME. And then to come out the other side and transform, it's like you see something that you think, this is the real deal. Hence why I ended up in that organisation, just believing it. And it happens, and it's like I've forgotten what the term is, but it's like brain control. And it happens little drip by little bit, by little bit, by little bit. And because I'd come from such a background, I was vulnerable. I really was that vulnerable adult. Didn't think I was, but I definitely was. And naive and trusting and the whole thing. And then suddenly getting to this point where now suddenly I'm trapped in this, thinking this horrendous stuff that's happened's all my fault. But then bit by bit by bit, slowly figuring out it wasn't my fault. Bit by bit by bit, realising that this is the opposite of what God is. Because they were teaching me to be constantly judgmental about other Christians. Because they weren't in our church. They weren't in our organisation. So they hadn't got it. They got it wrong. Never mind other religions, never mind other faiths, never mind, anybody that was outside the organisation. It was like they haven't got it right. It was so prejudiced. And I'd let myself become like that, so critical, so prejudiced, and realising that I was the opposite of what I wanted to be. To me, I grew up listening about stories about God and about Jesus, and Jesus was loving. He spoke to everybody. He befriended the tax collector that was ripping people off. He befriended the prostitutes. He befriended the outcasts, the lepers, all the outcasts from society. He befriended them. He, went past the leaders. He went past the people with influence and with money and went straight to the people that needed him, the poor, the needy, the widowed, the lonely, the desolate, the dying. That's where he focused on. That's where he paid that attention. And it was like, that's what I'd wanted to do. I'd been through so much. that my heart was to help other people. It was always the point. And then suddenly I'm doing the opposite, and I'm judging, and I'm avoiding, and I'm not, spending time with all these people that they were very well off. They didn't need anything else, and helping to like educate their children in the Sunday schools. And they were lovely kids, and I loved them dearly, but they didn't need it. They didn't need that actual kind of energy and help. And it's kind of like, if we're here and we're going to make a difference, in my mind, it's like you got to give it to the people that need it the most. So thankfully, long kind of story within that, I ended up getting through a night. They figured out that I had figured things out, and I was trying to figure out how on earth I was going to leave this organisation, because realistically I was being cut off, and being cut off from all the people that I loved there, and that was so hard. But eventually I got kicked out, and it was super hard, but actually one of the best things. And then it was like a chance to start rebuilding myself and rebuilding my life. And it still took a long time. And then I went from that straight into a relationship with a person who seemed amazing and loving and caring and just everything you'd ever want, and promising the best, and then changing within days of being married, worrying, what's wrong, thinking it was all my fault again. Just went through that same loop. And it was crazy how many times did I need to go through the loop of thinking, what's wrong, how have I got myself in this disastrous situation? Of literally going into fear, abuse, controlled every day. Everything was controlled. How did I get myself back into that situation? Thankfully, going to counselling to save the marriage, not for myself, but then it ended up saving me, not the marriage. And realising that I hated myself, realising that I had so much self-hate and self-loathing, and slowly kind of working through that and being able to look in the mirror. I'd avoided mirrors for so long, because I didn't like myself. I'd only look in the tiny little makeup mirror to do my makeup and stuff. I wouldn't look in big mirrors because I just hated myself. And then realising, actually, I'm not a nice person. I'm a loving person. I care for people. I'm always trying to care for people, help people. No matter where I was always making a difference in the little ways that I could. And then seeing me for who I really was, and saying, actually, I'm pretty and I'm slim and I've got, everything works properly. Do you mean realising that all the stuff that I was hating about myself wasn't true? It was all this other crap that had been pushed on me to kind of keep me down and keep me suppressed and keep me just controlled in that kind of controlled, limited mindset, and making the shift and making the change. But it's been a journey. It's still a journey. Sometimes it's still hard. But I feel like, coming back to Northern Ireland, I felt like I was being basically prodded on a weekly, if not more, basis by God, the universe, to come back to Northern Ireland. And I'd just been through hell, and I really did not want to come back, because in my mind, yes, I've got people here that I love, but it was helpful to have the Irish Sea between them, and I could just go a couple of weeks, see everybody, and leave again. Coming back home was facing 18 years of a really difficult childhood, of a really difficult childhood that I had, getting bullied at school, abused at home, feeling like I didn't really fit in, even though I loved my foster family, feeling like I didn't really fit in there. Also struggling to kind of trust people. There had been so much, and then all the stuff that had happened with the church that I'd gone to and how they'd taken advantage. There was so much here in this small place where everybody knows everybody else. And I was just like, geez, I can't do it. I've had enough, thanks. And I fought it. And I fought that for 4 months. And eventually I gave in and went, okay, if you want me to go back home, then you're going to have to show me, and you're going to have to work it all out. And then the miracle started happening, and it was just all these signs, and you couldn't argue with it. And it just all happened, and I came back home, and that was 7 years ago. And it's been such a journey since then, and meeting Viv and being able to work, give up the job that I was in and being able to work at Hangry and being in an environment where there was so much healing for me, but also so much healing for other people. She does amazing therapies there, particularly if, in really traumatic situations. She's incredible. And the float tank. And, from the outside, thinking about the float tank, you're thinking, well, I'm in there for 60 minutes, 90 minutes, maybe longer, in the darkness, no distractions, with only myself and my thoughts. Some people think that would be hell, but actually, because it's such a relaxing environment, it relaxed me. It made me switch off. Many times slept in the tank, would drift in and out of sleep. But it really is such an incredible environment. And I went in first time on the verge of having a panic attack, and Viv having to do some havening, which is an incredible technique, to basically get me to agree to get in. And then having the whole journey in that first float tank. And I think for me it was that being okay with myself, because I was always the doer. If something needed done, ask Judith. And the doing was always a distraction, because deep down I wasn't happy with myself. Deep down there were so many things that I still thought about myself, even though I'd come so far, there was still so far to go. And almost kind of justifying my existence by doing stuff and helping people. And I hadn't really thought it through like that, because in my heart I was doing it with the right reasons. But actually boiling it down, it was distracting myself, because there were so many things that I wasn't happy about within myself. And when you're in the float tank, there's nothing else but you in there. And actually to be content in a space and feel safe in that space was massive. And to realise that I did it. I didn't need a therapist. I didn't need, somebody else in there to fix me. It was me and a whole load of salty water, and that was it. And that was a big shift. And as it's gone on from then. There's been so many things, but for me it was such a healing environment there to be part of it. It's been incredible. I meet so many other amazing people on their healing journeys as well. And for me it was like, this was the reason I came back to Northern Ireland. And then the next reason, meeting you. If I hadn't listened, I wouldn't have been here. Would have been doing whatever. It's been, and I never thought I'd come back home. Never really thought I would settle back home. And here we are. And you love it here. And how that works, and things might change and we might go elsewhere, and that's fine. But it's, it really was, for me, it was facing fears to come home and face, what I went through in the childhood and the care system and everything that had gone on. It was really facing everything from like the early years all the way up. And it's nice now to be in a position that, yes, I might have flashbacks, I might remember stuff that I don't recall now, that I've never recalled, but I might come back later, but not being petrified of those and not being haunted by those. That was a major thing, where I was just worried about what else was going to come up, what other demons were going to come out that I hadn't remembered. But it's knowing that if they ever did, that I can handle it, it's going to be okay. One of the slogans that was out there at Hangry's is, the magic is within you. And it's so true. It is so true that it's there. If you can take the time and sit and listen, and you're so good at doing that. I've watched your example of doing that, and so many times where you're like, Judith, I think you need to go and spend some time with yourself. You're like, sometimes I needed that. But it was the best thing, because I'd avoided and ran away from myself for so long, thinking that everybody else had the answers. You know what I mean? Rather than going, oh, actually, I've got it. If I only sit with myself, face myself, you give yourself that time, you'll figure it out. And you get amazing people along the way that will help you on that journey as well.
Yep, absolutely. That's what it comes down to, is to finally get to know yourself and be comfortable with yourself in all aspects of yourself, and like you said, it's having these other modalities and people to help you along the way. Ultimately, it comes down to you. You know, none of these things are going to save you unless you save yourself, or at least have that decision or choice to finally say, like, what do I have? And you have you, and what can I do with that? What you almost take like an inventory of what you have at the moment, and then it is magic, because for me, I've had similar experiences where you feel like you have nothing left, or you feel like you don't have the resources, or you don't have access to things that perhaps people who are more fortunate have. But I think the common theme for anybody that doesn't have much, but they realize they have it all in themselves, you know, is that somehow the universe, God, will sort of bring you things present, the more present you are, right? And it is magical. So you're saying, Judy, that, go ahead, you can drink some water. But what was sort of the physiological effects? Because you were mentioning all these different kinds of emotions and feelings, you know, having panic attacks, serving to the detriment of yourself as a distraction. But what were like the sort of physiological feelings that you're having or suffering from, just for those that are listening that may be going through that currently? Because you have transformed since I've known you. I mean, our first date was like almost a wreck,
Yeah.
right?
I was so
I
nervous.
mean, I just literally was like, I couldn't wait for this date to end and, you know, move on with my life, just because you were just frantic and on the verge of like mania or something. I was just like sitting there going, holy shit, this is just too much energy. Like you were just running a million miles a second. It was just, but at a certain point, you know, and this is where like you excused yourself and you went to use the loo, as they call it here, the restroom or bathroom, and in it was just like very cold. And that's what the sea does. It really does, you know, kind of bring everything up, and you're able to like either get into fight or flight and panic when it gets cold, or you gain control of yourself through your breath, gain composure. And I'm sure, like as you said, in that bathroom or loo, that there was all these little phrases and sayings, because the folks that own that cafe are Christian, and you know, people would like kind of tag in the bathroom or leave little like positive graffiti. And from what I remember, you were saying that it really like calmed you down. So by the time you came back to the table, it was like you removed your mask and you just settled into like Judy. Not all the sort of baggage that you brought with yourself. You just let that go. You let the mask go, and I saw you for the first time, like the real you. And I just had so much interactions with people that had that, I guess, ability or skill. Some people call it a gift, to be able to see the real person behind the mask. And that's when I felt like we bonded and we connected.
Yeah.
And I was like, hey, it's okay. I don't know who do you think I am, but I don't, when I look in the mirror, I don't look like a monster, you know, like, so, you know, like we really connected, and from then on, that's when we were together, you know, and it was magical. So what were your physical manifestations, like your symptoms, your, you know, like for me, when I do public speaking, there's like this anxiety that's there, and I used to have like heavy anxiety, and to a point where, and sometimes I still do, like I sweat profusely. So as I look back on my childhood and the things that I went through that were like traumatic, and it's all relative, right? What was traumatic for me may be like a walk through the park for other people, but to me it was traumatic. That's how I saw the world. I framed it. That was the lens that I perceived. And then over time, through all these tools, meeting amazing people, having breakdowns, having breakthroughs, living life long enough, meeting old people, hanging out with animals, little kids that are just so pure, you know, you start to like almost master yourself. So I'm able to not sweat as much or not sweat at all anymore, depending on the context. And in some ways, I'm encouraged to go deeper, because with that sort of healing feedback loop, input output, instead of shying away from things that I'm afraid of, which I still am, you know, it took forever to get this podcast going again, right? But now we're doing it. And my point is that I'm able to find those things within myself, because that's the sort of like being reflected back to me. And that was the same when I did the float tank. When you're left there, you realize like, hey, you know, my childhood was like perfect for me, and like my journey, and now being an adult and maturing, continuing to mature, it never ends, but I'm able to face these situations or like go into them head on, and then be vulnerable, be like, okay, yeah, it's still, I'm gonna sweat, I'm still, but the mask is off. And I think that encourages other people to feel like, hey, if that's okay for Tony and Judy to do, then, you know, and they feel safe. And even though they feel like all those sensations that build up, like nervousness, anxiety, I used to stutter a lot. And so what were your symptoms? You know, what are you still, well, at least notice that you improved tremendously, because I've seen you improve like physically, you know, in terms of sweating less, like even through your hands and in your feet.
There was a lot going on with me physically. I think most of it was really, I was such a bottle upper. You know, everything I took on, I wasn't the kid that would have tantrums or scream or shout or whatever. I was quiet. I took it all on. I felt as if it was my fault. You know, so many things that happened, even when I was really young, I thought was my fault. What did I do? How did I upset them? That's why they treated me so badly. And that's why I continued on that same cycle, thinking that everything was always my fault for a very, very, very long time. I think it was 34 until I started realizing, oh, this isn't all my fault. The only fault that I had was I allowed it to happen. I was the common denominator. I was allowing this to happen. But, you know, physically I was having issues from such a young age. I mean, and only really getting on the top of it the last few years. I mean, and I'm not still fully there, but I'm almost there. But I think for me it was just a destroyed nervous system, constantly on fight or flight, sending stress hormones up all the time. So I didn't allow myself to sleep. I would only sleep when I was absolutely exhausted, and I did that as a child. And I remember, my foster parents can testify, never getting me to bed, you know, still rattling around 12, 1 in the morning, even though you have to get up early for school. Just would always fight sleep, and obviously sleep's the best thing in the world. You know, you taught me that. I've never slept so much in my life, literally. I think I'm making up for it. But if you're never getting enough sleep, and then you're just constantly living on your nerves, like I had the craziest metabolism. I would always eat more than any man I ever knew. Ate more than my dad, ate more than my foster dad, ate more than, you know, so many guys. It's just like I just had this crazy metabolism, and I was a lot lighter then as well. So just running through the calories all the time. But, you know, physically wise, there was... And I didn't know the terms panic attack and depression. I didn't really know that when I was younger. And it wasn't until, you know, I'd been working in Hangry for quite a while and seeing so many people come in and out that were traumatized, that were maybe struggling with addictions, that maybe self-harm, you know, so many different things, and so many with, you know, problems with depression and anxiety and having panic attacks, and helping people through having panic attacks. You know, I mean, one of the ladies, I remember early on having a panic attack basically before she was going into the float tank for the first time, and helping her through that process, and helping so many other people that were really truly scared about getting in the float tank, even though it's so benign. It's 25 centimeters of body temperature water. It's just this lovely space for you, but so many people were so afraid of doing it. And it's like, I get it. I basically was on the verge of having a panic attack before I went in, but it wasn't until years later I went, oh, that was a panic attack. I didn't know. I just knew I was freaking out, but I didn't know, oh, that's what that is. That's what that's about. I mean, and, you know, swimming in cold water. I'd loved swimming in cold water since I was a little girl, since I learned to swim. I remember swimming in the river that comes off the mountains here in Northern Ireland, Tullymore. And geez, I loved it. And it was freezing. It is Baltic. Even in the height of summer, that place is Baltic. It is the coldest water. And I just remember loving it. And realising later, actually that's because the cold switches off your nervous system, basically. It calms it right down. Because you basically, you get to that point where your body thinks you're going to kill itself because it's getting so cold. But you get past that bit and the fight or flight stops. And then it's just you. And I think that's why so many people love cold water swimming, because that's what happens. It just cancels out all the noise, all the stuff rabbiting around your head, pain in your body as well. That's when things happen. And that is supposed that, you know, to be drawn back into swimming in cold water was just normal and natural. I'd done it all my life, usually by myself. And, you know, there's very few other nut cases that wanted to do it with me, but now there's loads of them here, which is great. But a lot of that was because of just the mental anguish that was on in my head, but physically as well. My body was sore. I'd been sore from a little girl, you know, and there had been a lot of violence, and living in pain was normal. It's just what happened, and that's just what I lived with. I didn't really know any different for a long time. And a couple of other accidents that I'd had when I was a teenager as well, my own fault. I just had chronic neck pain, and that's just what I had, and I just lived with it. And as an adult, got worse and worse, and a couple of car accidents and whiplash and everything else thrown in there. I just lived in constant pain with my neck, and sometimes I didn't realise when other things had happened, when I was in other pain with other areas of my body, I'd get to a breaking point. And I'll be like, what's wrong? And then the realisation, oh, I'm in excruciating pain. My brain didn't seem to know. I think because I'd been in constant pain for such a long time that it wouldn't really recognise it properly. And then, you know, later on, different doctors and consultants going, geez, you have a very high pain threshold. How have you coped with these symptoms? How have you got on with your life? And you're like, I didn't know any different. I just had to get on with it. So, you know, there was a lot of physical pain, mental anguish, self-loathing. You know, physically wise, I was always sweaty. Even as a little girl, primary school, people didn't want to hold my hands. They were like, no, you got slimy hands. I remember the term slimy hands, because I was so sweaty. I was so nervous and anxious all the time. And later on, when I got fostered, my foster mom was like, "This is not normal," because I would just soak everything, you know what I mean? And sometimes I didn't feel particularly stress, or I'd be cold and I'd be sweating crazy. And they, did all these tests and diagnosed me with hyperhidrosis, which is basically excessive sweating. And I had that from young, and it's hard because you're like, particularly as a teenager, geez, there's so many different emotions going on. Plus I'm in care, plus there's a whole load of other stuff going on, plus exams. And then you've got excessive sweating on top of that. It's just like, doing my exams, I literally had to like get a whole load of the hand towels and have them. Otherwise I couldn't write on the paper. I'd soak the paper so badly I couldn't do it. Or the artwork, I always had to have different, paper towels and stuff all over it to make sure that I didn't destroy the work that I was doing. So lived with that for so long, and it's got so much better. And it was clearly just a nervous condition. You know what I mean? It was just, I think, living in that kind of chronic stress all the time. Trying to think what else. Going to the bathroom, always an issue since I was a little girl. I think from about 4. And it was, again, just that bottling up. The bottling up of all the emotions, because we weren't allowed to express when we were upset, when we're angry, when we were, we weren't allowed to express all of that. And if you did, then you were basically in line for more punishment. And to being able to unravel that, and it hasn't been until, there's been different times where I've been able to feel like I could be myself, but you've shown me such a unconditional love and such a consistent love that, yes, you've seen me at my best, but you've also seen me at my worst. But to know that you've seen me at my worst and you still love me is incredible. That's an incredible healing, to have that, and to know that no matter how much I freak out or lose it, that you still are there. You're here, you're committed, you love me. That's incredible. That's incredible to have that, and to see how you love me, and then realizing that I need to love myself more. I might have got bits right, but there's still a journey to go there. But the more that I find that I am able to be happy with me and what I see with me, the more comfortableness I can feel within me, I'm more comfortable with other people and other environments, particularly environments when it is stressful, that I'm not there full of nerves and fear. I'm realising that actually sometimes when you are nervous, it's a good thing. It's your adrenaline pumping, and it's good. It's nothing to be afraid of. In situations where normally I would freak out, that I was okay, and actually I was the calm one in those situations. Like when it was in emergency environments, I was great. I'd be like switched on, not panicking, nerves, wasn't even thinking about them, and I would just get on. And I remember different situations where I wasn't supposed to be the person that was in control. I wasn't the manager at the time, but I was actually then telling them what to do and how, what we needed to do in that emergency situation. But when I was outside of an emergency situation, and it was like day-to-day stress, particularly if it was with family or kind of close things, that's when I felt out of control, and I would give everybody else my control, and I would be like the whole big nervous wreck with inside it. But eventually, over time, with lots of different modalities, I've helped. Viv's work really helped with the havening as well. That really helped me a lot to face different fears that had happened where I would have generally been very triggered, and then actually
Vivian McKinnon
from Hangry. Yeah, that was a real big game changer, where I was able to face situations where normally I would freak out, and I was paused, I was calm, I wasn't freaking out, and my brain hadn't gone into that whole freak out kind of zone where it was fight or flight central. That's a major game changer, because when you're in fight or flight, like I realised, you just have to ride the storm. You can't give people a whole load of different advice if they're literally in full-on fight or flight. They can't hear you. They can't receive that information, and they can't do a breathing technique or whatever techniques they can't. You just need to let them ride the storm. And it's being able to kind of make that switch. And for me, when I was at Hangry and when I was working there and seeing other, people coming in and out in their healing journeys, it was realizing that actually it's all about the blueprint. And it felt like the blueprint that I'd had for so long, from so young, wasn't really the right blueprint, and it wasn't serving me. It was like you've got your electrical circuit, but it was wired basically really badly. And it was having to change that circuitry and having to take out, the big glitches that, kept coming up and kept coming up and kept coming up. But to change that, it's so fundamental. It was basically my foundations. Scary. It wasn't easy work to face it. But when you do, from then on in, it's like when you change the course of the ship, even though it might only be 1%, it totally changes the end destination. Over like a period of like how many miles, you've gone totally in a different direction. And it might seem tiny, this wee difference that you've made, but it's huge, like later on down the road. And there's been so many of those. And so grateful for so many people that have shown me. And sometimes it's just a random person that has said something and it's just totally stuck in there. Or sometimes it's the ones that are right there loving you and have been loving me for years. Even though I couldn't always receive it, they're still there loving me, still there consistently being there, or praying, on the sidelines and I don't even know, and I think that's something that's beautiful. No matter what you've been through, the beauty always shines through. It always shines through. And whether I was ready to see it or not, or even think of it, there would still be moments where things would happen. People would interject, or little animals would come across your path, or, just some little sign that would come through, and you think, we're loved so much. And the universe is there. Whatever you believe, the universe, God, creator, whoever that kind of being is, they're there. They've got the best for you. And when you kind of relax more into that and allow it, you'll see all these little signs. We have gifts every day. Every day. Like I wake up, I can see the trees from the bed. And this morning there's the most amazing little birds. We sat and watched the little birds. Little bullfinch. Most beautiful bird. Gorgeous colours. All these little chirpings going on. Little bumblebees. Flowers. And, just... There's so much of it, whether it's a good day, a bad day, a winter day, a sunny day, it doesn't matter. They're still there. They're still there. There's so many lovely little gifts that we get every day, whether we're really taking the time to notice, taking the time to listen. And it is those times where it is making that time, going out for those walks, giving yourself that 5 minutes at lunchtime to get outside. And for me, so many times when I find that I rest or I feel relaxed or I have like a healing moment, it's in nature. So many times. It just seems to come so much easier there. And I think it's almost because I'm not doing anything else. I'm just being there and just having that walk or that cycle or that swim or just sitting watching, the world go by. Just taking those moments. And it, as long as you've got, just making those little moments makes all the difference, and if you have, if you had a history of having a lot of bad days and you have a good day, the decisions that you make on the good days make such an impact. And I think, yeah, it's hard because my heart is to help people. Sometimes I talk a lot because you kind of think, oh, somebody could learn from this, somebody could learn from my journey. But then realizing, particularly with AA, that we're not here, we don't have an agenda like that. Do you know what I mean? I always thought that I've gone through so much horrendousness for a reason, and it must be to help other people in those situations, to help other people and give other people hope. And thankfully that happens automatically. You don't have to do that. People can just see from your own example. You don't have to be out there doing a whole load of different things. Big things. You always think it's always the big things. But sometimes it is just that hug or that smile or that encouraging text or something. It's quite often it's the small things. But actually our purpose here is to enjoy life. To enjoy the beautiful world that we live in. To celebrate what you have. And there's no agenda. And there's no plan. And there's no well, you have to get this you get your tick before you can leave. And it's like, that shifts everything. Like, I'm still trying to get that into my brain. But it's such a shift.
Oh, yeah.
But then I find that when you take yourself off this, I've got to achieve whatever it is in life, or what my purpose is, when you take that away and you're like, oh, I'm supposed to just enjoy this. That's when you enjoy the moments. That's when you enjoy the now. And I feel like that's when you make the most impact.
Absolutely. Yes.
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 Oh, figuring all this out.
Yeah, that's the beauty of conversation and talking out loud and having listening ears. That you definitely shared so many wonderful things. You've come a long way. You've been through hell and back with a handbasket of amazing, luscious, delicious yumminess. Gems for everybody listening. But like you're saying, life itself is the reward, you know, like play itself is the reward. There's no like goal or outcome. Yeah, not to say that those things are useful for giving you direction, but to achieve it and then realize like that it wasn't the thing that you thought it was gonna be. You know, you live life long enough, you start to realize that, you know, and you start to realize like what truly matters. And you certainly are an example of that, Judy. So grateful to share life with you, to be married to you, to continue the journey with you, just seeing your healing while we've been together. It's been amazing hearing your story. You bring light and inspiration to a lot of people, and you continue to be brave and look inside yourself, and you're less accident prone as a result.
Massively so.
And that's cool, because that was driving me nuts. Seeing you like hurt yourself. like life isn't hard enough. But it was like self-abuse, like just bumping into stuff, like getting mysterious bruises. It was like, holy shit, you have a high pain tolerance. And you just like barrel through, tank through like all kinds of situations, you know. And I'm like, a little more grace there, a little more grace. But
that's all about being present.
Yeah.
I mean, people, you know, had labelled me and my sisters as accident prone. It was like, it's just because we were never present.
Yeah.
We lived in fear, in that mindset, anxious about the future, sad, depressed about the past, never being right here. It's incredible how much that shifts.
Yep. Well, folks, we're at the end of this amazing comeback podcast of Hangry and Horny with Judy Floreal and Tony Floreal. We will continue on with more stories, and we just want to thank you for taking the time to listen. And I want to thank Judy for having the courage to coming on to this silly, funny, and rad show. And yeah, we just look forward to, you know, sharing more of the journey and being a support to all you out there. We're really grateful that you've given us the time to listen, and hopefully it's been of tremendous value to you. So with that, Judy, thanks for coming on, and look forward to having you on more and more with Flow Genome. And thanks everybody for listening. Ciao for now.
Thank you.